Reliance, founder Raveendran says moving mountains to make payrolls amid worsening liquidity crisis. And no emergency interim relief to Sony Group. Singapore International Arbitration Centre denies relief to Sony companies against Zee Entertainment Enterprises, says National Company Law Tribunal is the appropriate forum to pursue the matter. And Reliance Disney India are one step closer to the merger. Reliance Industries is set to acquire over 50 to 60% stake in Disney. Deal will strengthen Reliance's hold over India's $28 billion media and entertainment market. And all those stories we're tracking here on Newsline. But first up, the biggest story that is unfolding is by the way of Paytm Payments Bank and how it is likely to impact traders, merchants in the course of next 1 to 2 months. Karthik Malhotra here with me in the studio. Karthik, hi, good morning.
Morning, Shweta.
Paytm story refuses to die down. The latest that we are hearing are there are about 40 million merchants that have to be moved away from the Paytm Payments Merchant Bank to other banks that Paytm will be facilitating. But all in all, there's a lot of chaos, mayhem. Every time you are going to buy even groceries you're taking to Olas and Ubers, people don't know what to do with Paytm anymore.
Absolutely, Shweta. I think, this crisis is far from over. From whatever little we do understand right now and whatever is out in the public, it seems very clearly that the RBI order prohibiting Paytm Payments Bank to receive any credit transactions post 29th of February now has merchants across the country really wondering what is going to happen to those beautiful scan and pay QR codes and those sound boxes that Paytm had installed for them. You're right, almost 40, about 37 million merchants, that is 3.7 crore merchants in India actually keep the Paytm soundbox or the Paytm QR codes on which you scan and you pay. When you pay them, that payment goes to a linked Paytm Payments Bank account owned by the merchants. So this problem now is what happens to those merchants after the 29th of February. Now CAIT has written to all merchants, that is the Confederation of All India Traders, asking merchants to open other bank accounts which would be competing with Paytm Payments Bank and accept payments there. Now the task at hand for Paytm is fairly large. You've got to go, if you want to retain those merchants and if you want to retain those relationships with the merchants, you've got to go across the length and breadth of the country, rip off those old QR codes, paste them with new QR codes which will be linked to another bank account of the merchants.
Not the Paytm Payments
Not the Paytm Payments. So Paytm will have to, in order to retain these merchants and their relationships, go and print QR codes for their sound boxes and their QR codes to be active, but a money transaction that they will never receive in their own accounts. So they'll have to put in that extra hard work and put in those extra man hours and put in that extra technology to actually enable merchants to use the Paytm sound boxes and the QR codes to actually get money credited into competing bank accounts and not their own. So the problem is huge for Paytm.
Absolutely.
At one end, it is a logistics problem. At the other end, it is pretty much the death of the cash cow, which the whole company had fostered and nurtured for so long.
And there are two questions emerging at this point. Every person who's looking at the Paytm story, number one, they're wondering whether our Paytm account will have any impact of the RBI order. That is the question number one. Question number two is, if I have a Paytm Payments Bank account, will that be impacted post 29th of February? What exactly is the order to break it down for our audience right now? What does it really mean for an average person like you or me who uses Paytm on a daily basis?
Shweta, interestingly, a lot of users I have spoken to, and many of them being friends and family, regular users, not journalists, not people in the finance sector, but regular users of Paytm services, till the time the RBI order did not come in, they did not even actually know that they actually had a Paytm Payments Bank account. So your FASTag, for example, you assumed all this while that you've taken a Paytm enabled FASTag and that FASTag is linked to your wallet. Yes, it is linked to your wallet, but actually it is linked to a Paytm Payments Bank as well. So every time you want to top it up, you're adding money to your wallet, your wallet is then transferring money into the payments bank, and that payments bank is enabling the FASTag. So yeah, to answer your pointed question, Shweta, I think users can load up their balances on their wallets, for example,
so
till the 29th
still usable.
Yes, so even Vijay Shekhar Sharma on Friday morning in a tweet and thereafter in a letter to his employees has clearly stated, and if you go to the Paytm app today as well, there's a big banner notification which tells you that you can continue using your services uninterrupted even after the 29th of February. But you will not be able to top up your wallet post 29th of February. You will not be able to top up your Metro cards, mobility cards post 29th of February. You will not be able to top up your FASTag balance post 29th of February. So for those who want to retain and want to continue using that service, they'll have to top it up by the 29th of February. Okay. However, until the balance runs out and it trickles down to zero, you will be able to use these services even after the 29th of February. But there's one more hitch to this whole plan. Now, there are people who, for example, use Paytm as a service to pay for their electricity recharges. There are people who use Paytm to top up their mobile phone balances or pay their postpaid, mobile bills, or those who receive rental income in Paytm wallets, right? What happens to them after the 29th of February? And that is critical. So, Paytm, to our understanding right now, will work as a pure play UPI interface after the 29th of February, which means you can use the UPI which is linked to perhaps some other bank account to continue receiving or making transactions, right, which are relevant to society living, which are relevant to facility payments, electricity recharges, rental payments, etc. But beyond a pure play UPI service which does not make any money for Paytm, how is Paytm actually going to survive post 29th of February is a large question looming over Vijay Shekhar Sharma, over users of Paytm, both merchants as well as users like you and me.
Absolutely, and this has led to a lot of panic and chaos in the market as it is unfolding for the past 1 week. So one thing is clear, if you are a Paytm user, you can continue using Paytm beyond 29th of February. But if there is any transaction that is linked to the payments bank, that may not go through.
That will not go through after the 29th of February.
So that is clear. But as far as RBI's aggressive action is concerned, a lot of details unfolding as to what led to RBI actually, cracking a whip on Paytm Payments Bank. One of the narratives that is emerging right now is that over 1,000 accounts were linked to single PAN card, which was the starting or the tipping point of an inquiry.
KYC compliance definitely seems to be the foremost in all these issues.
Absolutely, and that led to a whole lot of inquiry, and a lot of other details also emerged from Vijay Shekhar Sharma's closet.
So definitely KYC compliance or non-compliance, persistent non-compliance is the language used in the RBI order. There has been persistent non-compliance. Understanding in media circles and in the reporting across papers suggests that you're right, multiple bank accounts, multiple wallets linked to a single Paytm, multiple FASTags linked to a single PAN number. So overall compliance issues, KYC issues is one part of the problem. A larger problem which is also getting reported now, Shweta, is that there should have been a Chinese wall of independent corporate governance at Paytm Payments Bank. That wall apparently was absent. So for example, to use any services of the Paytm Payments Bank account, you would still have to go through the Paytm FinTech app. Now, the holding pattern of Paytm Payments Bank, even though it was licensed as a payments bank, it received its license in 2015, started operating in 2016. The holding of Paytm Payments Bank is 49% by 197 Communication, which is the parent organization, and 51% by Vijay Shekhar Sharma himself. And all transactions, all data, all money flowing seamlessly between Paytm, the FinTech app, and Paytm Payments Bank suggests to the RBI's action that there wasn't a Chinese wall which should have been strong, which should have been tall, preventing this free flow of data or money from one platform to another. And that seems to be the biggest problem that the RBI has been telling Paytm to adhere to, and the persistent non-compliance, not just on account of KYC, but on account of this corporate misgovernance where two separate entities did not actually maintain those stringent checks and balances in place and let data flow freely between each other.
But in all of this, I think it's the end users that have suffered. There's a lot of panic, as I mentioned and I alluded to, because we never know what to trust and what could result in next action on perhaps another competitor in the fintech space. So all in all, I think the trust in the fintech ecosystem, that takes a beating every time there is a stringent, strict
I'm not
action
sure of
to
that,
this
Shweta.
regard.
To my mind, I think with a move like this, the trust in the regulator actually becomes far more strengthened than the mistrust arising out of misgovernance at fintech players.
Right, but you know, there is a sense of what happens to the other platform we go to, because merchants at this point are looking and scrambling to get on other platforms.
Of course,
what
that's
if there
a
is an
separate
action
issue.
on
Of
that
course,
platform?
no
Because
doubt.
there's a trust.
No doubt. I
These,
think,
you know, the transactions on a digital interface, they operate within a trust paradigm. That paradigm is shaken the moment there is an aggressive action to this nature on one of the biggest fintech players in the country.
I still believe, Shweta, while what you're saying is right, I still believe that as long as the money of the customers, whether in their wallets, whether in a savings account at Paytm Payments Bank, whether balance in their FASTags or Metro cards, as long as all of that money is protected, and as long as you're given the option to use that money freely with no moratorium placed on it, not yet at least, with no insolvency proceedings yet,
Right.
you feel that at least the regulator has stepped in time, allows users to continue using whatever they have parked aside in any of these fintech platforms, in this case Paytm specifically, and your money can be used, your money can be withdrawn, any cashback, any interest due to you will be credited back to you, and that money can be used freely. So it is definitely a larger business case problem for Paytm because its cash cow, which was the payments bank, is now getting cut down to pretty much a trickle. It will be unlikely to draw up an immediate alternative revenue stream. For the merchants, yes, there is a loss of trust in a brand which had installed those lovely, sound boxes which could talk to them. You don't really need to look at a mobile phone or look at your terminal to understand if the payment has come or not. And that added efficiency, that added agility to shopkeepers. For them, the logistics of porting out of Paytm to another bank account is going to be, it's going to be tardy. It's going to be tedious. It's not impossible. I think the fintech space, the entire payments ecosystem in the country is fairly robust. So finding an alternative will not be a problem for them. But yeah, for Paytm to retain them, on what basis would Paytm now be able to retain them, and the amount of cash it'll have to spend and the effort it'll have to spend to retain them is actually going to blow out another couple of crores, if not more, from their overall distressed financial position right now.
Absolutely, a mammoth task there for Paytm, but Paytm's loss is their competitors' gain. We are given to understand MobiKwik and PhonePe are seeing fresh merchant onboarding and at a rate never seen before. I think we'll leave the story at that. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back after a very short break.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?
Currently, the industry is facing a lot of challenges as far as demand is concerned. Basically, the US markets has slowed down because of high inflation.
So obviously, diamonds being a dream product, something which doesn't have a utility value or is seen as a luxury. So that obviously goes off your shopping list. That's the first item that will go off your shopping list, especially in recessionary trends.
That lab-grown diamonds are not mined, and they do away with the entire mining. So they save up on all the environmental damage that is associated with mining, and of course, the mining cost, which is why they're even more affordable.
People that is impacted by all these recessions are the artisans, are the people who work in this industry, right? But I think lab-grown diamond has allowed them to actually use their skills in the same product.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9+. Download now.
20,000 people dead and counting. What's happening in the United States of America is unprecedented. You will have to pay for this.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है मनी 9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
There's a new video around what deep fake can do.
We have seen a trailer of this a few days back.
Owners should not be only on the platform.
We'll have to wait and see how those play out.
Hindenburg's report cannot be taken as gospel of truth.
Welcome back. We continue to track the Byju story. After delaying January salaries, founder Byju Raveendran has now come on record to state that the salaries have been credited. In fact, he also stated that he has moved mountains to ensure that the employees get their January dues despite having or suffering severe liquidity crisis at Byju's, a continuing crisis that Byju's has been faced with for over months and weeks now. Karthik, this is a saga that continues to unfold every month on month. It appears that after Byju's having letting gone of at least 3,000 to 3,500 people in the course of last 1 year, is still not able to pay up salaries for the remainder of their employees. About 50 crore rupees that Byju's have to shell out every month to pay their employees. It's getting it difficult for them to manage that money.
Yeah, but I mean, it's great for Byju Raveendran to come out and write these heroic letters to employees and make these very smart statements, in gatherings when he's interacting with employees. But the problem is, somebody's got to tell him that he's the maker of these problems and he's not the one who's at the receiving end. In fact, he's the fountainhead of all these problems actually springing up for the company. And at some point, founders have to take responsibility. And that is the only responsibility that he's taking as a founder and CEO. I understand he has himself faced troubled times over the last 1 year where he had to put his own property on mortgage. I think 2 of his houses in Bangalore were put up on the block, and he raised some money from those mortgages to pay off salaries in the month of November or December, if I'm not mistaken. And thereafter, the crisis continues in the month of Jan. Moving mountain sounds great, but there's a mountain of troubles which is already standing very, very tall in front of the entire company, not just Byju Raveendran and his wife Divya Gokulnath and brother Riju Raveendran, who all should ideally step down from the board, and Byju Raveendran should resign as CEO because of the mess that he's created for the organization. So, every time he comes up with these, quick, smart comments on through the letters that he writes or through the addresses that he makes to his employees, I think at some point somebody's got to stand up to him and tell him, and I think the board is trying to do that.
And investors,
yeah, but what happened to that EGM? Because that EGM has been pending since July last year. July, the board had requested for an EGM. It was dismissed. There was no EGM. December again, an EGM was requested. Nothing happened. Jan again, some of the investors who were holding board seats earlier, including Process, including Chang, Zuckerberg Investments, including Sequoia, which is now called Peak 15 Ventures, they are no longer sitting on the board, but they still have their investments. Even those investments may have been written down on their own books, but the point is these are still investors who had parked solid money into the company's coffers. And Byju Raveendran has not done justice as founder, as CEO of the edtech firm, of the entire parent company Think and Learn, to give those investors any return. If anything, a negative return as deep down as 99% slashing down of values is humongous for investors.
Absolutely.
So at one point, there are investors who are not likely to derive any value out of their investments which they have parked at Byju's. Employees don't know what their future looks like because their salaries keep getting delayed. There are rounds and rounds of layoffs. The US unit of Byju's has already last week filed for bankruptcy, a Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Delaware. And there's a $1.2 billion debt that is as huge a mountain as you come across ever. There's a $1.2 billion debt which Byju's has no way of servicing. Now, there is an NCLT hearing in Bengaluru on the 7th of February where it seems that the creditors of Byju's are going to drag Byju Raveendran and the company to some sort of bankruptcy insolvency proceedings. And it's a matter of time before it gets admitted, because we know for a fact the company does not have money. Their financial results for FY22, which in any case came about 22 months too late, but FY23 results are yet to see light of the day. We had auditors resigning, you had Deloitte walking away, you had BDO coming in. But despite all of that, you don't still see the FY23 results, which were a delayed result. Reporting was to have happened in December. That has not happened. The FY22 results show that losses at a consolidated group level are as high as 8,500 crore rupees against a revenue of about 5,000 crore rupees. I mean, what kind of a business is being run here where your losses are almost 70-80% higher than the total revenue that you've driven? And FY22, remember Shweta, we keep saying this, was still the year between 1st April 2021, when we were in the thick of the pandemic, to 31st March 2022, when the pandemic had started to ebb out. So there would have been far more number of users of Byju's services. There would have been far more number of students paying those fees for the courses online that they were doing on Byju's platforms. But FY23 is going to be a different ball game altogether.
Could be a washout here for Byju's, we never know. But, you know, come to think of it, the valuation has tanked over 90%, and that is by the way of a rights issue. 99%
now with the rights issue.
With the rights issue, which is valuing, where the company is valuing itself to the tune of about $225 million from $22 billion at the peak of its valuation. Now, some money is likely to come in through that route.
I don't know which investor would want to participate in the rights issue, to be honest, because even if you want to increase your stake, you're increasing your stake on a company which is now valued at just
dwindling
1% of what it was once valued. Do you really want to increase your stake in that company?
And is there any business sense and business value in the company?
Until the board changes, until the family is kicked out of the board, and until the founder CEO resigns from day-to-day operations, I think there is no merit in anybody making any investment via a rights issue or via any other fresh infusion of capital into Byju's.
All right, very strong words coming in from Karthik, unlike Karthik, but I think that is the story, that is what it demands. Byju's that continues to be in the news, employees that have no semblance of normalcy for a while now, and Byju Raveendran, letters on letters in which he continues to talk about how he's a warrior, battling challenges on all fronts, at the same time not resigning from the board despite clarion calls to do so for a while now. But shifting focus to another story, which is likely to be a relief for Zee Enterprises amid the ongoing NCLT proceedings. The Singapore Arbitration Centre has now denied Sony Group's relief, or the plea to get an emergency relief from the NCLT proceedings, suggesting, Karthik, that NCLT is the right forum. And Zee can now continue to push Sony to come back on the track for that $10 million.
I think there is definitely a glimmer of hope here for the Zee Group, definitely not as much for Sony, because Sony, I think, was betting on the Singapore International Arbitration Court Tribunal to actually come to its rescue. Sony, in its statement, is still saying that it will continue to pursue the tribunal at the International Tribunal at Singapore. At the same time, is going to contest NCLT as well. But the NCLT hearing for Zee-Sony is now likely to be the deciding factor in how the Zee-Sony saga unfolds here on. Zee, on its part, has been very clear. It wants to force Sony back on the table. It wants to push through with the merger one way or another. I think Zee, of course, has a lot more at stake, has a lot more to lose as compared to Sony. Sony definitely not keen to go through with the merger. Sony is also slapping, termination fees, etc., to the tune of $90 million on Zee. Zee is contesting that as well. So I think this saga also, fortunately or unfortunately, is far from over. In all likelihood, one was assuming that the deal would have gone through 2 years of time invested by Sony and Zee, both, to be fair, into making this merger happen. deadline after deadline got missed, got delayed, but then I think Sony was not blindfolded. Sony knew all this while what were the troubles that Zee Group was facing. Zee Group now coming out and saying that it has done nothing wrong. In fact, all the obligations of the merger that had to be met have been met by Zee Group, barring of course the final date of 21st of Jan, which was already extended from the 21st of December, and Zee could not go through with all its obligations but was just seeking another extension of date. Sony deciding to walk out, obviously, you know, this is a large opportunity for both Sony and Zee to come together. Sony deciding to walk out, you know, for its own reasons, but now Zee definitely seems to be having a bit of an upper hand in this ongoing negotiation. The fact that SIAC
that is if NCLT rules in favor
but
of Zee.
at least we know for a fact that it is NCLT which is going to decide and not the Singapore International Arbitration Tribunal. So that gives some comfort to Zee because that is what Zee wanted. It is home ground and that is what Zee wanted. Zee wanted NCLT to come in and Zee wanted to push the case in NCLT, and the International Tribunal may not have seen the the pain of the Indian media industry perhaps as closely as NCLT is likely to. So that is what Zee is betting on.
So I think the big question is, can NCLT or will NCLT at this point in time force Sony to come back on the table as far as deal is concerned? That is what it's going to be ruling on.
That is what it will rule on, and I think we cannot prejudge what the judges at NCLT the judges at NCLT are going to come out with. But this is what Sony wanted. This is what Zee wanted. This is what Sony did not want. Zee has got what it wanted, at least temporarily for now. And Sony not happy, but will have to play ball.
Absolutely. Sony will have to play ball, and Sony will have to face the NCLT as far as the deal and the mega merger which got derailed with Zee. Whether NCLT will rule in favor of one or the other, we don't know, but it would be interesting to watch out for those proceedings. But while as that story unfolds, another story that is unfolding in the media and entertainment space is that of Reliance and Disney. It appears that their merger is now one step closer. You know, but I keep going back to, and it's important that we talk about how Zee-Sony did not pan out, so you never know with media and entertainment space. There are too many slips between a cup and a lip. But let's understand what's happening with Zee, with Reliance and Hotstar Disney at this point in time. We know that Reliance is looking to buy at least 50 to 60% stake in Disney's India business. If that goes through, Reliance would be the majority shareholder in the merged entity and perhaps one of the biggest OTT players in the country.
No perhaps here. You know, I think the perhaps is clearly out of the window, because if the merger goes through, we are looking at a total ad revenue split by market share to the tune of close to 45 to 50% for this combined entity. Now, what we know for a fact is that the India business of Disney Star has been valued at between $3.8 to $4 billion. About 60% of that is likely to be owned by Reliance, right? So, I mean, there are various reports, some suggesting 50, some saying 60, but data right now suggests that even if they were to own anything between 50 to 60% and their own existing investments in Viacom 18, in Sports 18, in Jio Cinema, in the merged entity, Reliance is likely to own a much larger chunk than 60%, because the Disney Star business in India is valued at about $4 billion. If Reliance were to invest anything between $2.2 to $2.4 billion into that merger, they own 60% of Disney's existing value, and then their own libraries and their own audiences and their own revenue gets added. So overall the pie becomes much bigger. Now, what we also know for a fact is that there are going to be 100+ channels. There are going to be 2 solid OTT apps, and then imagine the kind of merged libraries of the 2 enterprises, because Jio already has access among its own Viacom 18 library and the Colors library and the sports rights that it has by way of cricket broadcast rights. It also now has rights for all HBO content, which includes Succession and Game of Thrones. Even though these are old series, these are still series which people keep coming back to, and new audiences keep latching on to those series and keep watching them. And it has the BBC library already. Add to this the entire Walt Disney collection. Add to that the entire Marvel collection. You're talking about a huge operation of international content on one side, and then Star's own bouquet of regional channels, Color's own bouquet of regional channels, all getting combined. Disney Hotstar still continuing to hold some cricket streaming rights. Jio Cinema continue to to hold ICC cricket streaming rights. Sports 18 continues to hold broadcast cricket rights. So there are three big buckets that this merged entity is going to be leading in. International content on one side, sports content, cricket dominated on one side, and the entire regional bouquet on another side, and two well-to-do OTT apps in the middle of all this. I think we are looking at a very, very fine step moving towards monopoly of the Indian media industry. And unless, going back to the Sony Zee story, unless there is somebody who comes either to the rescue of Zee or somebody who wants to partner with Sony and have one more large entity in the media, entertainment and sports business set up in India, we are definitely looking at Reliance monopolizing the space.
All right, Reliance monopoly, they're likely to pan out extremely very, very soon. It could be as soon as perhaps a year's time before all the, all sorts of regulatory hurdles are cleared, because from here we'll start all the regulatory proceedings, and we've seen that in case of Sony Zee. It's taken over 2 years, could have been under 1 year had it not been for all the SEBI proceedings. So maybe next 1 year or so?
I think well within the next 1 year, Shweta. I think we are looking at a few months. We are not looking at anything exceeding 1 year. So there are not too many regulatory hurdles for both entities to tide over. Zee was a very different story because there were a lot of other, conflicting regulatory challenges accruing to businesses outside of the core entertainment business or linkages to the entertainment business. In the case of Disney Star and in the case of Reliance, I don't see regulatory hurdles springing up. The Competition Commission of India has already given the go-ahead. I think it's just a matter of one final round of negotiations, signing the paperwork and stitching up the deal and going ahead with the merged entity.
And, correct me if I'm wrong, Reliance is perhaps one of the nascent entrance into the media and entertainment space, has been here for less than a decade or so, and now is perhaps the most dominant player of them
But
all.
we know Reliance, right? Reliance gets into any industry only because it wants to disrupt it, it wants to carpet bomb, and it wants to go after scale. It doesn't get into niche businesses because that is not the Reliance DNA. So the fact that Reliance did enter, go big and walk yourself happily to the bank every time. The fact that it enters a business or it enters a market is only because it sees scale and it sees its own appetite to consume that scale and really, get businesses to reach that scale, which others find fairly unimaginable.
All right, and there is no bigger scale than this. Reliance Disney India, as I mentioned, one step closer to the merger, could happen within a year's time from now, making Reliance Industries one of the biggest media and entertainment player in the country. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching.
On October 27, 2023, the world awakened to a new crisis. A new turn in a 70-years-old civil war. One that has grave implications not just for India, but also regional stability in Southeast Asia. Today, News 9 looks at the mayhem in Myanmar. For decades, Tatmadaw, Myanmar's military junta, held the nation in a tight vice-like grip, but not anymore. Myanmar is undergoing a seismic shift as a coalition of ethnic rebel groups known as the Three Brotherhood Alliance launched Operation 1027. A series of coordinated offensives challenging the military junta's rule. This alliance, consisting of the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, the Tang National Liberation Army, and the Arakan Army, seeks to overthrow the military regime. Over the course of the last month, the rebels overran large parts of the country, seizing towns and military outposts. According to analysts, rebels now control over 50% of Myanmar, and the military installed President Min Aung, warning that Myanmar is in danger of breaking apart.
The Three Brotherhood Alliance, comprising rebel groups like the MNDAA, the TNLA and the Arakan Army, have been successfully challenging the military junta's rule. They've made significant territorial gains in coordinated offensives. Now, reports suggest that the junta is now restricted to just a few large cities. And at the moment, the military still has the edge when it comes to air power. However, the Tatmadaw army, the Burmese military, appears to be extremely short on manpower, supplies and ammunition. They're holding out now for a long and bloody struggle.
The conflict that now reaches in Myanmar has its origin in one moment. On the morning of 1 February 2021, Myanmar's democratically elected ruling party, the National League, was deposed in a coup. But the junta was not entirely successful. Resistance to the Tatmadaw survived in the form of a national unity government, the People's Defence Forces, and a number of ethnic rebel groups. Now it appears that the opposition forces have united. Geopolitical dynamics, ethnic tensions, and historical grievances are all playing a role in the present conflict.
General Min Aung staged a coup, and he didn't have the election as he promised. He said, within 1 or 2 years he will have a new election. But until now, about 3 years passed, still no election.
The junta's actions in the past 2 or 3 years haven't really helped. But the truth is, Myanmar has always had a sort of fractured polity. The northern part of the country is home to almost a dozen rebel groups who've been waging their own independence struggles for over 70 years. But what's different now, today, is the fact that the rebel groups are united. And for the first time in history, there's a concerted effort to defeat the junta. The alliance has been gaining ground through strategic coordination, exploiting vulnerabilities in the military's control. It enjoys support from anti-junta factions, and this is what's led to these territorial captures. And then there's, of course, the China factor. It's no secret that Beijing was extremely unhappy with the rise of Chinese crime syndicates on the Myanmar-China border. And despite Chinese pressure, the junta, it appears, took no action. Now, the fact that the rebels now appear to have China's blessings doesn't seem to be a coincidence.
It is part of the Golden Triangle, where traditionally there are a lot of sources of instability. There are drugs, guns running, those kind of things. And China is also equally affected because of this security dynamics that is going on inside Myanmar.
See, China has always had an influence in Myanmar with all parties in that country. In other words, China has had an influence with the government in Myanmar, and it has also been arming, funding, keeping certain insurgent groups under its control. So this is part of the game that China is playing.
The implications for India are particularly worrisome. According to a UN report, over 26,000 Myanmar nationals have sought asylum in India, seeking refuge from the conflict between the rebels and Tatmadaw. Now, for the first time, soldiers from the Myanmar military are crossing over into India as refugees. The influx, especially into border states like Mizoram and Manipur, raises humanitarian concerns and poses security challenges for India. Furthermore, a protracted conflict in Myanmar could impact Indian infrastructure projects such as the Trilateral Highway and the Kaladan Multimodal Transit Transport Project.
Absolutely. It's not only India, Bangladesh or Thailand. It is also affecting the entire region. There are boat people from Myanmar, they're reaching up to Sri Lanka. There are boat people trying to escape from Myanmar to Indonesia.